Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Red fire, math, devil scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. I want to start tonight's episode off with a question to you guys. Have you been keeping track? Are you running a tally in regards to how much money has Canada actually committed to Ukraine and the Ukrainian government? I tried doing the math today, and I'm not going to lie, I got a little bit confused. I'll walk you guys through the math, but I believe it's a pretty big number. In fact, if you were to guess that it starts with a B, I think that you're probably going to be right. So again, we're going to dive into that and a lot more in tonight's Maple Pill episode. I know that I woke up this morning to see cryptocurrency was just on a tear, and it seemed like the markets were on a tear. I still do not understand why that would be the case. I would think that, the risk of World War III and, things like the crazy sanctions being implemented against Russia should be enough to kind of give our markets pause at this point in time. I know I was on a phone call just the other day with a friend, kind of, we were trading conspiracy theories, I guess you could call it. And I was bringing up, I was in a clubhouse room the other night and just kind of listening to the group chat, and an intelligent individual was talking about some of the different derivative trades going on in regards to Russian-backed assets, and saying that they expected that by the end of this month, those trades would have to be either marked down or unwound, and that should have significant consequences to the global markets. Seems like the global markets do not care from what I'm seeing. If you guys could explain to me how modern economics works, in a short little comment tonight, that would be wonderful. But otherwise, let's jump into tonight's show. We're going to be talking about the Ukraine. We're going to be talking about a little bit about the Freedom Trucker Convoy updates. Nothing too much there currently. And then finally, I've got a full course of pills for you guys. So we're going to go through the blue pill, the red pill, the black pill, the clown pill, and then finally the white pill as well. And appreciate when you guys jump in, share your opinions in the comment section as always. And enough of my preamble, let's jump into it. So the first thing I want to share with you guys before we even get into the situation in Ukraine, I just thought that this little post or this meme here perfectly summed up my perspective. I do not stand with Ukraine. I do not stand with Russia. I do not stand with the UN or NATO. I stand with the civilians in each country who will lose everything and be displaced, while politicians and their media play their war and propaganda games. Not sure why that's offensive to so many people. And another sentiment I've seen, circling the internet is no more brother wars. And yeah, I'm down for that. I think at this point in time, let's let politicians, the mainstream media, actually be the ones to pick up guns and go fight each other. Again, this applies to both sides of the equation, whether we're talking about Russia or Ukraine, whether we're talking about other foreign conflicts going on. I can't help but feel like every time we get caught up in a foreign entanglement, it seems to spiral out of control. We spend way more money than we were ever told it was going to cost. We end up losing way more lives and causing way more collateral damage than we ever expected. And then, 10, 20 years later, we leave that area and it always seems worse off than when we entered it. Quick highlight would be in recent memory, places like Iraq and Afghanistan. But the list is very long. You can look at multiple South American countries where essentially the CIA fought proxy wars. I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit holes. But yeah, I'm done with it. I don't think that we need to see more innocent civilians die at this point in time. And I think both mainstream media as well as the politicians need to actually start focusing on solutions rather than rhetoric. Next, I want to share from the Ron Paul Institute. This is a fantastic essay and really worth reading from start to finish. Links, as always, to everything we're going to be discussing tonight in the video description down below, but I'm just going to cover the intro here. The biggest losers are the people of Ukraine. They are being killed, injured, and maimed by the Russian invasion of their country. The invasion is also destroying their homes, businesses, and, their entire country. The Ukrainian people are also the big losers because of the person they have as their president. Vladimir Zelensky, yes, I know. The U.S. mainstream press compares Zelensky to George Washington, but the fact is that Washington would never have sacrificed his own citizenry for the sake of pleasing a foreign power. That's what Zelensky has done. He's willing to sacrifice tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens for the sake of pleasing bureaucrats within the U.S. government. After all, when all is said and done, Zelensky was faced with a choice: give up any interest in Ukraine joining the old Pentagon CIA-controlled Cold War dinosaur known as NATO, or suffer a deadly and destructive invasion by Russia that would inevitably wreak massive death and destruction in Ukraine. Zelensky chose his love of NATO over his loyalty to the Ukrainian people. When he chose NATO, he knew full well that the price of that choice would be a Russian invasion that would kill, injure, and maim tens of thousands of his countrymen and destroy untold amounts of homes, businesses, and infrastructure. So again, really worth reading this entire article. I encourage you guys to do so, but we're going to keep rolling here. Next, this is from BBC News. Putin says sanctions over Ukraine are like a declaration of war. And certainly it's a form of economic warfare, arguably the same way that, hacking or, any sort of technological warfare these days we enact. But there still is a difference, right, technically, between like hot kinetic warfare where we're literally shooting projectiles at each other versus economic sanctions or, internet shenanigans. And I guess speaking of the internet shenanigans, I haven't been able to find a great story on this yet. But one of the rumors that are circulating right now is that Russia will actually be dropping off of the internet come March 11th. I haven't seen any source that I would want to, put my full faith and trust in on this subject matter. I do think it's interesting. I definitely think it's something worth paying attention to. And certainly for those of you that, for whatever reason, your economic livelihood or anything like that is tethered to the internet, you might want to front load some work before March 11th, because if Russia was to drop off the internet, I could see in theory them wanting to wreak havoc on the internet once they went to their own net. But just want to hit upon this article from BBC here. Russian President Vladimir Putin has described sanctions imposed by Western nations over his invasion of Ukraine as akin to a declaration of war. But thank God it has not come to that, he added. Mr. Putin also warned that any attempt to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine would be seen as participation in the armed conflict, and he rejected suggestions that he would introduce a state of emergency or martial law in Russia. And I don't know if you guys actually saw this press release, but it was really bizarre because he was actually in front of a bunch of air stewardess, and not sure why that all played out the way it did. But again, if you guys want to dive a little bit deeper into it, the reason I wanted to highlight this is, again, the idea of a no-fly zone, that pretty much puts us into a kinetic war with Russia, unless we're talking about just supplying anti-air missiles and batteries to Ukraine. But we'll see how that all plays out. Next, from National Post, exclusive. So many Canadian fighters in Ukraine, they have their own battalion, source says. The International Legion for the Territorial Defense of Ukraine says the 550 would-be fighters from Canada are based in Kiev. And I just found this interesting that 550 Canadians are over there right now prepared to fight for Ukraine. Personally, for these regional conflicts, I think that this is the right way to go about this, that if individual Canadian citizens want to participate, they should be allowed to. They should also be able to donate resources to Ukraine if they want to support it. At the same time, I can't imagine, and I know that the government's already said they believe it would be illegal to do this, but if people were to do this on the Russian side of the conflict, I know it's not an apples-to-apples comparison because Russia did invade here. I do think that that would come with severe consequences. So again, in a perfect world, I think any and all foreign incursions should just be individual citizens choosing to participate. And the Canadian government should always stay arm's length from any of those sort of engagements, in my humble opinion. But let's keep rolling here. Canada sending another $50 million in specialized equipment to Ukraine. This is from Trudeau. So Trudeau acknowledged getting the equipment into Ukraine has not been easy. So this is from today. So this was a recent announcement. I was like, 50 million. Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure I read something about 120 million back in January. And then wasn't there also 400 million? And now, again, some of this stuff gets confusing because sometimes it's like loans, other times it's investments, other times it's straight up like donations or us giving them things. But it really got me going down a rabbit hole tonight, just trying to figure out, like, how much money have we really invested or committed or spent in regards to Ukraine? And so first things first, yep, the 120 million to Ukraine, looking at further action in face of Russian aggression. This was back in January of this year. Then in middle of February, we essentially had Canada to give 500 million loan to send 7.8 million in lethal weapons to Ukraine. And this was actually in addition to what had already been promised in that 120 million. So Ottawa, Canada will provide a $500 million loan and $7.8 million worth of lethal equipment and ammunition to Ukraine as the threat of a Russian invasion grows, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Monday. He said the pledge is on top of a previously announced $120 million loan and non-lethal weapons that Canada has already provided to Ukraine. So this got me kind of thinking, is there anywhere I can just find out what the total is in regards to how much money we've committed to Ukraine? And so this is from international.gc.ca. So this is the government of Canada's website in regards to Ukraine. And just want to highlight a few things here. Now, again, this website was last updated February 25th, I think, of this year. So I'm not sure if this includes the 500 million that we just talked about. It certainly wouldn't include the 50 million that was just announced today because the website hasn't been updated yet. But if I understand things correctly, I'm not confident that $500 million is included in this total. But again, it honestly is hard to parse out how much is fully committed here. But since January 2014, we have committed more than 890 million in multifaceted support to Ukraine using a range of instruments. These instruments include development, humanitarian, and financial assistance, peace and stabilization operations program, the Canadian police arrangement. So I also believe that this money wouldn't include any lethal weapons or ammunitions. Again, based upon the way it's framed here, but it is hard to tell. But I'm pretty sure it's safe to say at this point in time, Canada's committed at least $1 billion to the Ukraine over the course of since the Orange Revolution back in 2014 to today. And I technically, at least, I wonder if we're not actually closer to almost like 1.4 or 1.5 billion in total donations and loans and things like that. And again, I don't understand how these loans actually work when you're dealing with foreign countries. Obviously, if Ukraine falls, we'd be outed, I would suspect. But I don't know, if and when Ukraine actually pays this back, do they just tell us it's a loan because it's easier for essentially citizens to accept that? And understand that, $1 billion maybe doesn't sound like a lot of money these days because, gas is $2 a liter and things like that. But it really is. It actually is a lot of money. And for example, we're in unprecedented deficit spending right now in Canada. Over the last 4 months, we've essentially done a deficit of $40 billion. But again, even if we annualize that and roll it out and assume it's going to be a straight line, again, it's so hard to know these days. The government barely even wants to pass budgets. They just think they should be given blank checks. But if we were to put that at, let's call it $100 billion or $120 billion a year deficit that we're on track for right now in the 2021-2022 fiscal period, that still wouldn't be an insignificant dollar amount, right? I think Canada's GDP is what, like 160 billion USD per year. So again, $1 billion is still, despite what you may think, actually a lot of money. And I guess one question I do have just in general to you guys, and I would love it if the Canadian government would answer this, is there limits to this? Can the government just pledge as much money as they want to Ukraine and other foreign countries for that matter? Or are they working within certain guidelines where Trudeau can promise up to X amount, and then after that, he'd have to go to Parliament and get permission and do things of that nature? Because it's, I don't know, interesting. Let's call it that. If you guys do want to understand a little bit more, though, about the relationship between Canada and Ukraine, this is also a great website to do so. So it kind of breaks down, we've got a free trade agreement with Ukraine. I didn't even realize that was back in 2017. And they're actually looking to update it in 2022 in that regards. So again, if you guys want to understand better, I think it also mentioned somewhere here on this page that 1.7 Canadians are from Ukrainian heritage, which actually, again, we're a country of coming up on 40 million Canadians. That's not insignificant, right? We're talking about 5% of the population here has Ukrainian heritage. So anyways, more facts in the links in the video description down below. But next, let's jump over to CTV News. Rewriting history, military official says NATO trying to counter Russian propaganda. So I kind of Russia is more than capable of pushing out propaganda. but so is the West also capable of pushing out propaganda. But I did find it interesting to hear a Canadian saying that essentially Russia's trying to rewrite history, when just yesterday and later today, we're going to cover it again. We've been talking about the story in regards to the federal archives, right? And about how the head librarian there just started deleting stories and articles because they believed it might be offensive to some Canadians. So Canada's deleting history, Russia's rewriting it. But it all kind of feels like it works out to the same thing at the end of the day. Next, this is from Glenn Greenwald. Again, a great article to fully sink your teeth into. But yesterday we were chatting about the biolabs in in Ukraine. And just wanted to highlight a couple of key points here that Matt makes in his Substack. Unfortunately for this propaganda racket masquerading as neutral and high-minded fact-checking, the neocon official long in charge of U.S. policy in Ukraine testified on Monday before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and strongly suggested that such claims are, at least in part, true. This is in regards to, does Ukraine have biological warfare labs? Yesterday afternoon, Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Marco Rubio, hoping to debunk growing claims that there are chemical weapon labs in Ukraine, smugly asked Nuland, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons? Rubio undoubtedly expected a flat denial by Nuland, thus providing further proof that such speculation is dastardly fake news emanating from the Kremlin, the CCP, and QAnon. Instead, Nuland did something completely uncharacteristic for her, for neocons, and for senior U.S. foreign policy officials. For some reason, she told a version of the truth. Her answer visibly stunned Rubio, who, as soon as he realized the damage she was doing to the U.S. campaign by telling the truth, interrupted her and demanded that she instead affirm that if a biological attack were to occur, everyone should be 100% sure that it was Russia who did it. Grateful for the life raft, Nuland told Rubio he was right. So, again, I don't think I played that full clip for you guys. We just listened to a 30-second version of it yesterday. But at the end of the clip, that does actually play out the way Matt here, Glenn Greenwald lays out in his article. And this is important because how can you know that? Hey, if something were to happen in the future, can we be 100% certain the bad guy did it and we didn't do it or our allies didn't do it? Yes. But it hasn't even happened yet. So how could you know that with certainty? And it's things like that that I think make those of us that are maybe conspiracy theorists or more oriented towards entertaining conspiracy theories to be like, well, if you're so certain of it before it happens, kind of feels like if you were a bad actor planning a false flag, you would want to get this shit on record so that when your false flag did go up, you could then, be like, hey, look back to that Senate hearing when we stated we knew it was going to be Russia that would do a biological or chemical attack, and it would never be Ukraine. Again, I'm not saying that that's actually the case, but I understand why people drift towards these sort of conclusions when it's so hard to even just get straight facts from the government. Because again, understand when she's asked that question, she pivots, right? When asked about whether Ukraine has chemical or biological weapons, she pivots and her actual answer is, well, they've got biological labs that we're concerned that Russia may take control of. Again, that doesn't actually answer the question. It should have been no. And then that would make it a lot easier for us to have full faith and trust, or at least some faith and trust in the U.S. government. Now from the province. So this is going to switch us into our first blue pill story of the day. BC urged to expand safer drug supply to prevent overdose deaths. The Death Review Panel report looked into the staggering 6,007 deaths from toxic illicit drugs between August 2017 to July 2021. And we really do have a fentanyl issue here in Canada. It seems like particularly on the East Coast, but I imagine we're going to continue to see it spread across Canada. I think Sam Cooper in his book, Willful Blindness, does an excellent job of laying out how we got here to this point in time and how, unless Canadian government officials and administrators and politicians are willing to take a hard line against the CCP, Chinese billionaires that are laundering money, and the triads, we're not actually going to ever solve the fentanyl issue. Again, it really does start in the ports of BC, but it spreads across actually all of North America. It's not even just uniquely a Canadian problem. But 6,007 deaths in BC over that time period of 4 years isn't insignificant. And one thing I want to highlight here is last year there were 2,224 suspected overdose deaths, a 26% jump over the previous year. And I can't help but think things like lockdowns, mandates, all those things have unintended consequences. I think people turning to substances to either kill the boredom or to numb the pain of the situation they find themselves in, or simply because it wasn't as easy to get outreach and help during that time period, they're the worst for it. And I can't help but think that a 26% increase year over year is at least in part related to that. So again, if you guys want to jump into it, link to the province article in the video description down below. Next, from the National Observer, Canadian banks, insurance companies have poured millions into Russian oil and gas. So just wanted to highlight this because it kind of builds upon that discussion I was having at the start of the show of I'm shocked that the market seemed to not give a shit about exposure to Russian markets and what you would expect should be a big impact on the overall global economy. New research from international climate nonprofit Stand.Earth shows Manulife, RBC, CIBC, BMO, and others have collectively financed Russia's three largest oil and gas companies, Gazprom, Lukoil, and Rosneft, with more than US $110 million worth of investments. The data was compiled using financial software called a Bloomberg terminal that tracks investments in real time. So if you guys want to look further into that, link in the video description down below. To be honest, I'm kind of surprised it wasn't even more exposure for the Canadian banks and insurance companies, but still $100 million, it's significant. Next, from Millennial, Ontario Liberal leader says revoking mask mandates for kids is premature and the wrong decision. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'm just out of touch with the Liberal base of voters, but Del Duca saying this feels like he must be in Doug Ford's pocket. Like, I just can't see how you would think that that's the thing, that's the hill to die on, right? And he refers to his child or his children in the article or in the press release as well, essentially saying that like he's seen or he's been worried for them and he doesn't want to see them exposed to risks. And I'm just like, do you not look at the science at all? Like, children are not at significant risk from COVID, particularly if they don't have pre-existing conditions and they're not overweight. So unless your child is morbidly obese or has a pre-existing health condition that puts them at greater risk, the idea that we should mask every child in this province just on the altar of the hopes of a little bit more perceived safety, regardless of the consequences and the long-term consequences to their development, is completely asinine. It's wrong. It's fucking evil. I don't know how else to say it at this point in time. If you think that masking kids, and understand that almost nowhere else in the world is doing this at this point in time, if you still think masking kids in Canada because of COVID-19, mandatory masks too. It's one thing if your kid just wants to wear a mask or they love LARPing in a mask these days as a social justice warrior or whatever, that's fine. Let them do them. But to force every single child to wear a mask is evil. It is what it is. I can't frame it any other way at this stage. I've got no patience for individuals that think that way. Next, from the Western Standard, and this is going to bring us into our first red pill story of the day. Brown exonerated after CTV fake news story. So allegations of sexual misconduct in 2018 were made against Brown, who was an Ontario Progressive Conservative MPP at the time, caused widespread concern and political consternation. So again, if you guys don't remember this, back in 2018, two women came forward and made allegations against Brown. CTV News reported on it extensively, essentially torpedoed his entire career. Fast forward 4 years later, an $8 million suit by Brown. And, you know, it turns out CTV apologized and they came to a settlement with Patrick Brown. And again, this is why we need to be so careful about jumping to conclusions. Because think about the trajectory, right? We could be living in a completely alternative timeline had this not played out. Maybe Patrick Brown would have won the Ontario provincial leadership here for the Conservatives. Maybe he would have found himself in Doug Ford's position. Maybe he wouldn't have gone quite as crazy as Doug Ford and just been like, hey, health officials, you do whatever you want to cover your ass. As long as it covers my ass, we're good to go. So again, just interesting. If you guys want to read further about it, link in the video description down below. Next from Millennial, protesters demand that biological males not be housed in women's prisons. This seems pretty reasonable. Essentially, these protests occurred on March 6th, and I believe it was at 6 women's prisons in Canada and the United States. And yeah, I honestly don't even see how this is really a thing at this point in time. I don't think that convicted criminals should get to choose where they want to go, or they should be able to simply identify as whatever they want in order to try and find themselves in an environment where they potentially can, be predators and things of that nature. Yeah, I don't know. We live in the clown world timeline at points. Next from Blacklock's reporter, cop cams by 2023 at earliest. So mandatory body cams by the RCMP will not be in place until 2023 at the earliest. The Mounties have resisted demands for cameras dating from the videotaped 2007 death of a Vancouver man in police custody. The procurement process is ongoing, RCMP said in a statement. The exact timeline for the body-worn camera rollout will be confirmed once a vendor is selected, but it's expected to be in the first half of 2022. I believe they initially budgeted about $240 million for this program. I'm just going to go out on a wild limb here and guess based upon past experiences when we read about government contracts. I bet it's going to take longer, and I bet it'll cost more than what they originally projected, because that's literally just how it always works with government contracts. Maybe they'll come up with a random excuse for it, but they always go over budget, and they always go over their timelines as well. Next from Global News, Ukraine war adding massive costs for farmers and consumers about to feel it too. So again, we were already on a trajectory of having a very aggressive inflation here in Canada. Hyperinflation gets thrown around a lot, and there is a technical term there. While we're probably not on the cusp of that yet, we're probably closer than we should be. And I think this the Ukraine conflict is absolutely going to put more pressure on supply chains. And at this point in time, I think one of the smartest things the Canadian government could do is literally just cancel COVID. Let's just declare victory on the war on COVID, or declare defeat. I don't give a shit how you frame it, but let's move on from the mandates, and let's actually focus on starting to repair our economy, repair our relationships, right? We've got such a divide at this point in time. It's hard for me to imagine that we're ever going to fully reconcile as a nation, but let's at least make an attempt. Let's at least start moving in the right direction. Next, want to talk about this from Timcast. Florida legislator passes parental rights and education bill, now headed to DeSantis. This is something we covered yesterday. This was the don't say gay bill. Again, literally the word gay is not even in there. I would argue it's more, and lots of other pundits have argued this, that it's more of a anti-grooming bill. So the idea here was that, sexual orientation and gender identity shouldn't be taught to children between kindergarten and grade 3. And apparently that is so repulsive to the left in the United States, to the progressives, that they decided to frame this as a anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ alphabet soup narrative. And again, it's such a disservice here, because what we should be really focused on is why the hell in the first place would you think it's okay to teach these things to kindergartners to grade 3s, right? Like, what's your motive for this? I saw earlier this morning, I think Louder with Crowder was doing a story on it, and he essentially was asking that question, right? Or maybe it was on the Timcast, I forget. But they were essentially saying that oftentimes when individuals from the left are challenging the right, they see nefarious ulterior motives, right? In their desire to implement certain policies or changes to rules, regulations, and laws. Well, what reason does a kindergarten teacher have to have discussions with their class about gender politics it blows my mind that this is even a discussion point, right? Up in a really cloistered or closed environment where I'm pretty sure it wasn't until grade 9 that I had my first sex ed class, right? And that wasn't just phys ed, and that was part of our phys ed in grade 9. Again, I need to talk to some old classmates and be like, hey, from grade kindergarten to grade 8, did we have a single sex class? Because I don't remember. I must have slept through it if we did. But the reason I wanted to bring this up again is just looking at the way it's framed by the Biden administration. So this is a tweet from the president of the United States. I want every member of the LGBTQI plus community, especially the kids who will be impacted by this hateful bill, to know that you are loved and accepted just as you are. I have your back, and my administration will continue to fight for the protections and safety you deserve. And this is in reference to a tweet from the White House. Today, conservative politicians in Florida advanced legislation designed to attack LGBTQI plus kids instead of making growing up harder for young people. POTUS is focused on keeping schools open and supporting students' mental health. Honestly, I think that you're going to make children's lives harder if you start introducing gender politics and identity politics into kindergartners. I don't see how you don't fuck up a generation with that. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned in my outlook on the world. Next, let's switch in to a couple black pills here. This is from Blacklocks. Government grateful for coverage. So Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez is promising more media subsidies after thanking reporters for their Freedom Convoy coverage. Look at the role the journalists played, said Rodriguez. I think there are even more things we should be able to do. We're looking into that in the context of supporting the whole ecosystem. Minister Rodriguez in 2019 sponsored Income Tax Act amendments passed by Parliament to pay $595 million in subsidies, including payroll rebates to cabinet-approved media. Again, this is important, cabinet-approved media. He did not explain what new subsidies were planned, but praised unnamed reporters for their Freedom Convoy coverage. And what's fascinating here is the only ones that took money from the government are also the ones that only painted the Freedom Convoy as a fringe element, as racist, misogynist, as rapist. Now, apparently, they're calling the Freedom Trucker convoys as well. And this isn't how a functioning democracy is supposed to actually act, right? The fourth estate is supposed to be a check and balance against the political class. And instead, we literally just, they're not even in bed with each other at this point in time. They literally just are interchangeable almost. And this should be concerning because, again, that $600 million, that's on top of the over $1 billion that's given to the CBC already, right? Right now here in Canada, you've got Rogers demanding that Canada force RT or Russia Today to not be allowed to be aired in Canada. Meanwhile, we've got our own propaganda wings that we pay hundreds of millions and billions of dollars to, and that's not an issue, right? We have no real checks and balances to ensure they're actually reporting the truth and not the government narrative. And if you don't think that they're susceptible to corruption, the media, you literally aren't paying attention at this point in time. Next, this is from the Epoch Times. 3% are militia groups headed by FBI informants, court hears in Whitmer kidnap conspiracy trial. And so this is worth, again, reading from start to finish. But if you guys weren't paying attention to the Whitmer kidnap case, the more you look into it, the more it just seems like the FBI now is in the business of starting extremist groups and Facebook groups, creating like honeypots or tricking people into joining them, then putting them in charge of it, then arresting them for the things the FBI originally set up. Because that's literally the case here, where an FBI informant or an FBI employee set up a Facebook page that was for the 3%ers here, put, aggressive rhetoric on it, attracted other individuals, took one of those individuals, promoted him and made it his group. And then, fast forward a couple of years and they arrest you for it. And it's just like, how this isn't undercover shit. If you're the ones creating the organizations, if you're the ones creating the social media pages, this isn't undercover shit. You're not like catching someone in the act. You're literally like handing them a smoking gun and then arresting them for it. And this honestly shouldn't surprise us because the FBI, ATF, and all the alphabet agencies are not good people. They're evil. They do not have the average person's best interest at heart. Next from True North, and this arguably could be a clown pill story. It feels like it should be from the Beaverton, if the Beaverton was actually funny. But from True North, Housing Crown Corporation gave $48 million in bonuses during housing crisis. So yeah, the CMHC, which is the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, gave $48 million in bonuses. Well, under their watch, we're seeing a housing crisis. How does that make sense, right? I guess the reason they probably gave these big bonuses to their employees was their employees can't afford houses, and so the only way they could afford a house is to get, bonuses. Again, Beaverton, this is all you had to do was add that extra sentence, and you've got a funny story here for once. Next from Zero Hedge, Schiff, the road to debt monetization is paved with good intentions. And while I won't agree with everything Peter Schiff says, he's got a really good point here. And again, this is my biggest concern about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It isn't the aspect of this regional conflict. It's the fact that the U.S. is essentially weaponizing their reserve currency status, right? And because of that, you would think it's going to push a lot of state actors out of choosing to settle in USD currency, right, when they're doing international trade. And for those of us that aren't paying attention, or maybe you've got better things to do, understand that the US's biggest export, it's not what you think it is. It's not technology. It's not social media. It's not tech companies. It's actually USD dollars, right? It's honestly their fiat currency. And the only reason they're able to get away with it, and the only reason they've gotten away with it for so long, is because, when compared to other empires and other state actors, yeah, I guess the U.S. is actually pretty stable, and they've got a big army. But if they continue down this trajectory, we are going to see it completely destabilize, and we will experience unprecedented inflation if that occurs in a short period of time. But from Peter Schiff here, the idea that we might do something similar clearly is not going to sit well with the Chinese, who have trillions of US dollars invested in US treasuries or other assets that we might just decide to seize or default on if we don't agree with something the Chinese are doing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be invading another country. We could flex this muscle whenever we want. I don't think China enjoys basically putting a noose around their neck and throwing the other end to the United States. And we're also seeing stories come out right now about India and their concerns. I think back in 2018 or 2019, India bought some defensive weapons from Russia. And the U.S. is upset about that and planning to implement sanctions or penalties against India. And we're seeing high-level officials in India now talking about their long-term concerns about this consequence. If somehow the U.S. isolates China, India, and Russia on the opposite side of the good spectrum from the mainstream media and the Western politicians' perspective, you're literally isolating like 3 billion people, right? Almost half the planet. That's not going to go over well. And also, again, in case you weren't paying attention, the BRIC countries, well, those are 3 of the BRICS, right? You've got Russia, India, China. The only one that we're not focusing on really pissing off right now is Brazil. And hopefully we're too busy pissing off the other countries before we get around to pissing off Brazil. Next from Zero Hedge, an LME member has defaulted on billions in margin calls, but the LME doesn't want to declare default. And so this is one of the things that makes me nervous about how heady the markets are right now, is that are we seeing something similar to, think about the movie The Big Short, right? Where we saw the credit agencies and the large trading houses and hedge funds choosing not to update to market their holdings because they wanted to first unwind their trades and make sure they were in the black before they ended up being like, oh yeah, all this debt is junk. And I'm kind of nervous that that's the case right now going on in the global economy as well with Russia, because as far as my brain can reconcile, there's only a couple ways this plays out. One is it turns out the conflict in Russia and the sanctions aren't a big deal. And, in a couple days or weeks, it's just going to disappear somehow. I don't understand how the hell that would happen, but it would make sense why the markets don't give a shit if that was the case. The other one is there's going to be significant consequences, and we're just delaying the punishment a little bit longer. We're just kicking the ball down the road in the hopes that someone else will have to pay the piper rather than us. Why have they done this? Essentially, this was to give time, and by canceling trades, reduce the amount for a major Chinese member to make a margin call. But in reality, this was default by a member, and LME choosing not to place that member in default. So again, half of this stuff's above my pay grade, but I'm very suspicious about what's going on right now in the global economy. Next, from True North, and this brings us into our clown pill story of the day. Comedian Andrew Schultz destroys Trudeau at Meridian Hall. Not sure if you guys saw it, but I thought this was worth sharing.
Yo, Punjabis, be honest. When Trudeau did the Punjabi face, and What was more offensive, that he put on the turban or he made y'all dark skinned? Which was more offensive? A bunch of Punjabis in the group chat like, yo, how the fuck are you gonna make us Sri Lankan, bro? This is crazy, yo. We're from the north of India. We're fair skinned. We light-skinned Indians over here. Get it right, Trudeau. Oh, this guy Trudeau. Shut the fuck up, this guy. Does anybody, does anybody like him? Nobody likes him, right?
So, anyways, I found that humorous. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next from the Toronto Sun, and I'm going to classify this as a clown pill as well, but archival material purge led to staff bearing the brunt of public outcry. I just wanted to share a couple of the complaints that the archivists got about them just deleting aspects of history that might offend someone. So one complainant wrote, "Are you guys on drugs?" Another one wrote, "Your site is an archive. It is supposed to keep outdated material. That is its function." Yeah, you pretty much had one job to archive what's going on. Instead, you decided to try and delete or massage history to not be offensive. Clown world. We live in the age of hilarious, guys. Going on to a couple of white pill stories now. And again, I don't think that these are the best white pills, but they're the white pills we've got. If you guys want to share with me your white pill stories, you can always do that in the Problems or Profits Discord. Link in the video description down below. You'll find a Maple Pill channel. But European politician condemns Trudeau's human rights violations against convoy. A Finnish politician is calling the European Union to denounce Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's violent crackdown on peaceful trucker convoy protests in Ottawa. This would be awesome if it happened. Not because I think that it would actually have significant consequences for Trudeau, but it would have to be an ego blow for him if literally the EU denounced his reaction to the trucker convoy. Next from National Post, Timothy Andrew Sale, Canada's new NATO role should be defending North America. I know this is going to be controversial amongst all the Warhawks, but as NATO reorganizes, it is time for Canada to abandon its efforts to be all things to all international partners. And so essentially the article argues that, hey, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, why in Canada don't we just focus on the North Atlantic part? Why don't we just focus on defending the north of North America and doing our best there? And that'll probably be our best contribution overall to NATO. Seems pretty reasonable to me, and yet I got a feeling that this will fall on deaf ears amongst the administration and politicians, because you wouldn't get any standing ovations. You wouldn't get to change your profile photo whenever you felt like it in order to virtue signal, if that was the case, if we're really just focused on domestic affairs. From Global News, Ontario lifts mask mandates in most settings March 21st, all directives to drop by April 27th. Now, again, this is a white pill. This is a step in the right direction. I am suspicious because of the fact that we've been burned in the past. I hope they never bring back this shit again if it does eventually lapse. Literally, never forget, never again. However, the mask mandate will remain in place for higher risk settings such as transit, long-term care, retirement homes, hospitals, shelters, jails, and congregate care and living centers. So if you guys want kind of a breakdown, here's a summary page here just on the CMOH directives and letter of instructions. So essentially March 14th, we revoked Directive 6, revoked letter of instruction to Minister of Children, Community, and Social Services. March 21st, essentially most masking mandates and all that stuff goes away. So again, March 14th was the mandatory vaccination policies. But again, we literally saw this week, Air Canada, I believe, announced that they're going to be letting go unvaccinated employees. Meanwhile, like, we're literally like weeks away from that no longer being a thing. Like, it's like the left hand's not talking to the right hand at this point in time. March 28th is the Reopening Ontario Act expires. And then April 27th, all remaining measures, directives, and orders end. So, God willing, politicians willing, by April 27th, maybe we'll be almost back to normal, sort of, kind of. And hopefully they'll someday let us even get back our travel rights, our international travel rights. Maybe someday I can actually get on an airplane again. Now from National News Watch, Tory critic asks Privacy Commissioner to investigate hack of convoy fundraising site. So, yeah, I mean, why did it take this long for this to happen is maybe a decent question in and of itself, but I guess better late than never. Ottawa, the conservative critic for ethics and accountable government, says he has asked the privacy commissioner to investigate the hacking of a crowdfunding platform that raised money for convoy protests and blockades. Tory MP James Bezin says the blatant breach of privacy of Canadian donors has led to doxing campaigns, identification of personal and business addresses, and targeted harassment. And we've covered that at length. There still is a witch hunt to a certain extent. We were just talking about it yesterday in regards to the Ottawa Police Department, trying to find out if there was any Ottawa police that supported the Freedom Trucker convoy. So we're not out of the woods yet, but technically this is what passes for a white pill right now with me. Let's jump into the meme of the day. I thought this one was great from Bob Morin. I virtue. My mask protects Ukrainian pregnant men from climate change. Yeah, that actually feels like something that someone would say soon. I hope you guys are having a good Wednesday. I hope you're enjoying the Maple Pill. If you do enjoy what I'm doing here, please do consider giving a smash to that like button as well. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. I would love to get to 1,000 subscribers before we get deleted off of YouTube. Just a personal goal. And if I ever do disappear off of YouTube or Facebook, reminder, you can always find me on Rumble or BitChute. There's a link in the video description down below to those channels as well. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered. Essentially, it's mainly a meme page and me just kind of giving my hot takes on things and situations. And yeah, otherwise, let's jump into the chat. I really do appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation with me. And those of you that share this on social media, you definitely get bonus points, and you're the true hero, because ever since we got that strike, I just get no views, and that's okay. I'm not designed for their platforms, but I'll stay on their platforms for as long as I can. Farzana, what the heck happened in the markets today? Indexes through the roof. Yeah, I literally don't get it. I need an adult to explain to me what's going on with the financial markets. Bite Hunter says second. What's up? JJ Clems, how's everyone doing tonight? Terry, the world is protesting Russia with sanctions, which is going to hurt the people. Absolutely, again, and that's one of my big frustrations right now with mainstream media and even politicians is choosing to deliberately demonize all Russians, right? And we know that the NPCs just need an excuse to go out and cause havoc, and that's why we see things like desecration and attacks on Russian churches and community centers here in Canada. In the United States, Russian ethnic restaurants are being attacked. And oftentimes, it's not like these are Russians that just got off the boat that are starting these churches, these community centers, or restaurants. Oftentimes, they're born and bred Canadians and Americans that just are proud of their Russian heritage. Again, I think that we're honestly only going to polarize and add fodder to Putin's narrative and propaganda with our aggressive rhetoric ourselves. Terry says, I agree that citizens should be able to defend themselves from attackers. Don Jean, when Canada is in debt, where and why is it getting $1 billion to Ukraine? Yep, that's a great question. And again, one of the things, we live in the internet technology era. I shouldn't have to read a summary page and be able to be like, well, give or take, I think it's about 950 million to maybe 1.5 billion that we've given to Ukraine, but I can't really tell. It should be very easy for us to actually, in theory, access and get aggregates of this data, but I don't think the government actually cares about transparency when it comes to budgets or how they choose to spend our money. Farzana, I wish the government would invest more in Canada. Went to the passport office today to find over 40 people in line. Was then told I need an appointment to come there. Went home to get an appointment. Was then told someone would call in 48 hours to book an appointment. What the heck is happening? I can't remember it being such a pain to apply for a passport before. That's wild. You're making me nervous now. I might have to check and see when my passport expires and get in front of that. But again, am I ever even going to need my passport if Canada just won't let me leave? I'm being sort of facetious there. Terry says, if it does seem like we jump to help others, yet don't help ourselves. Absolutely. Again, we somehow don't seem to be able to solve the water crisis on First Nation or Indigenous reserves. And yet, we're sending, again, hundreds of millions at a minimum, maybe billions of dollars to Ukraine. I feel like we could probably find good uses for our money here in Canada. Terry says, yeah, kids don't need to know that shit. 100% agree. Too much information. That's more of a mom and dad topic. I really do think that a lot of parents and society in general have done a disservice to their children by wanting to outsource the entire education and essentially raising of their child to the state. There's the classic saying that Michael Malice says, status or communists don't have children, they have yours. And that should honestly send shivers down the spine of any parent or anyone that's aspiring to have a family someday, because that is pure truth. There's no joke there. That's just straight facts. Hungarian Experiment says, didn't get notification. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, but appreciate you jumping on. Terry says, all this digital money disruption is the same as going into someone's house and looting them. Yes, it's just a lot easier and it seems less aggressive, right? Like, understand that, the idea of like, let's freeze every Russian with a crypto bank account or with a crypto account on any of these exchanges. Well, if we can just like flip a switch or change the line of code, it doesn't seem bad. But if you were literally breaking down doors to each individual that had money on these exchanges that dared to be a Russian citizen or connected to Russians, that would be insane, right? One, it would be cost ineffective for the most part. And what you would see is they wouldn't be punishing the average citizen. They'd only be going after the oligarchs. But right now, the motives of violence or the profits of violence because of technology allows it to essentially be worthwhile to, not only attack the oligarchs, but attack the grandma that's got $50. Bite Hunter, Andrew Schultz is so funny. 100% agree. Definitely enjoy him. And JP Sears and any of these kind of new wave of comedians that are really, comedy, the idea of the court jester is supposed to be making fun of the privileged, of the elite, of the king, right? That's the whole idea of being like the court jester, is you're attacking the powerful. But right now, when you go and look at like late night TV, SNL, they all attack the average citizen, right? And this is why they're not funny. This is why they are losing market share and viewership, is because there's nothing funny about like kicking someone when they're down, right? It's about going after those that are on a pedestal, those that believe they're better than us, and reminding them that like, hey, your shit also stinks. Sean says, what's your take? Digital banking, which is decided on how you use that money, and your take on hodl people to people crypto exchange or transactions. I'm not sure if I understand the hodl part, but definitely the idea of digital, like CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, should frighten every single one of us, because in recent memory, we've both seen from the Canadian and now the US government, their willingness to punish anyone that disagrees with them, right? Here in Canada, it was the Freedom Trucker Convoy. In the United States, it's going after anyone connected with Russia through the SWIFT payment system. We need to insulate ourselves from the ability to have our wealth and our natural surplus from our labors being easily confiscatable. Now, how you choose to solve that problem will likely be different depending upon your personal world outlook, your personal goals and motivations. But at a minimum, I think it's wise for people to at least educate themselves about things like gold and silver, as well as Bitcoin. There's other options out there as well, privacy coins and things of that nature. But I think that you would do yourself well to at least look at putting a bit of an emergency fund or allocating a portion of your emergency fund into those asset classes. Now, again, that's not with the goal of getting rich because you bought gold or you bought Bitcoin. One, I don't think it'll play out that way with gold. Two, even with Bitcoin, it's a volatile asset class, and it's going to be volatile for a while. That's just the nature of a new emerging, hopefully reserve currency, world reserve currency. So I think that for at least a portion of your wealth that you're looking to protect yourself or have that, when shit hits the fan, into the world as we know it, those sort of funds, I think, are well placed in that. Again, even having access to some cash, I know it depreciates at a infuriating rate these days. But we saw crazy lineups in Russia the moment they started announcing the financial sanctions. And while the ruble has dropped an insane amount in regards to its value, it still is worth having some paper currency, even if it's just the to be able to bribe your way across that border in order to be able to, buy that last loaf of bread at the store. So who knows how this all plays out in the future, whether we see CBDCs quickly pushed by the members of the World Economic Forum and the Davos crew and all that out to the G7 or the G20 countries, whether we see, Russia or other state actors implementing cyber warfare and being able to disrupt the internet and payment systems and things of that nature. I definitely believe that there's a higher probability today and in the near future of extreme volatility in society than probably at any point in my life. Now, again, does that mean it's a high probability? No, definitely doesn't. But I guess the way I kind of explain my perspective to my friends these days is, honestly, I'd probably put like the crazy black swan event where you're talking about like economic collapse or a real long-term depression that like has significant long-term consequences that like devastates generational wealth. It was probably always below 1% risk throughout my life. Now I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, it might actually be a 1% or greater risk. And, when you kind of put that into context, again, if someone was like, hey, do you want to take a risk and there's a 1% chance of consequences? If the consequences aren't devastating, you'd often be like, yeah, I'm down for that. That doesn't seem like a big risk. But when we look at even like in 1986, right, the Challenger spacecraft, I believe that they originally thought there was like a 1 in 100,000 chance risk of like fatal error. And it turns out that they were mistaken and it was actually a 1 in 100. So again, a 1 in 100 risk can actually play out and be devastating, but it also doesn't mean that it's a high probability. So that's my personal hot take here. Again, love it when you guys share your thoughts and opinions in that comment section. Hungarian Experiment, Full Send podcast just dropped an episode with Trump and his opinions on Russia, Ukraine. Interesting. So Full Send, that's the what is it? I'm forgetting their names now, but those the Nelk boys, right? That must be them. Again, I've maybe lost, not that I really paid attention or cared for them that much, but I lost a little bit of respect. It seems like they've scammed their audience a few times from my perspective. And I think we've mentioned it. CoffeeZilla does a great breakdown of it, but I'm curious to see Trump on the Full Send podcast. So I'll probably check that out. Tara says, if they truly plan to remove the diaper mandate, they would just do it now. What the crap would ever change in the next 28 days? I vote that we all donate our diapers to those who are still obsessed with them, and they can layer those bad boys up until they're unrecognizable person, but oh so safe. Continuing the diaper mandates for any sphere of life is just their determination to try and keep their power and some in bondage, and they want to never let that go. I agree with you. I think that the reason they don't drop it immediately is in the hopes of saving face. I'm sure they also love the wild card if maybe something bad can happen so they can justify an extension of it. But I personally think the primary motive right now is likely going to be just saving face. We've got Aislinn in the chat. Thanks for another wonderful episode of the Maple Pill. Or have lost. Got it. Sean, digital ID is being introduced in Ontario based on Canadian bank advertisements. Yes, by the end of this year, they plan on rolling it out. To the best of my knowledge, it's still going to be optional for now. But the idea is you'll be able to set up a bank account. You can do certain things at government facilities with this digital ID. I'm going to drag my feet for as long as possible. But hey, I'm still the guy rocking the red and white health card. So like until they tell me that like I'm forbidden from participating in the healthcare system, I'm going to hodl that card because I don't see why I need a photo ID for it. Until you can prove to me that there was rampant abuse of the system with the white and red cards, it just feels like an invasion of privacy, right? Having to update it. You used to get a health card that lasted you for your entire life, and now you have to get updated every couple of years. Fuck that shit. We honestly shouldn't even have driver's licenses and things like that. Aislinn, serious comment now. A very sincere thank you for covering the news so effectively. Much appreciated. I appreciate it, Aislinn. Tara says they're literally using Russians to further push the government's cancel culture propaganda that they created to divide and conquer humanity. It's sick and twisted. And I've heard stories of Russians in the U.S. who can't even get their rent lease renewed for the first time simply because they're Russian. This is poisonous and not even intelligent on any level. Yep, I agreed with that. Sam saying even grade 3 is too young, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't think you're wrong for that. And again, I think grade 4 is still pretty young. Honestly, I guess we do live in the internet age, and kids probably are exposed to things at a much younger age. But I'd still much rather have parents have those awkward and difficult conversations with their children rather than have a state employee. And that's all a teacher is an employee of the state. Sean says, hodl hodl is a method to do crypto transactions between themselves to avoid banks or centralized banking. Okay, so like that's like a closed economy, right? Or sometimes we hear like about like a closed Bitcoin economy, and the idea is that you're just trading amongst yourselves. Yeah, peer to peer. I think that is the way in the future. I think that the barter economy, small closed economies with your friends, neighbors, and relatives, all those things we should bring back into vogue. We should try and make it as difficult as possible for the government to have as much information on us as possible. So again, whether that's moving your communications to Signal, whether that's choosing to disconnect from periods of time from the internet, or like turning off some of the tracking features on your phone and things of that nature. I definitely think, though, trying to restrict the amount of financial information the government has on you is just a best practice at this point in time, because we've seen they will use anything and everything against you when the opportunity presents itself. So Mark Moss is talking about that. That's awesome. And yeah, again, it in theory could be whatever you want, right? I think Bitcoin makes sense because there's a greater liquidity pool on the back end, right? Or as an off ramp if you choose to exit that closed economy. But certainly, like in theory, you could have like promissory notes amongst you and your personal network, right? For transactions and things of that nature. Now, obviously, legally speaking, you have to report all that to the government. And technically, even with things like the barter economy. So be aware. Terry, thanks again, Matt. Great show. Appreciate it. Aislinn, my Alberta health card is a piece of paper with no photo that I had to laminate myself. That's the way. That's the way it should be. Graham, the Alberta health card is an unlaminated paper with what looks like typewriter font on it. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I mean, like my Ontario one is a red and white card. It is like a credit card, and it's got like my number on it, but that's it. That's all it should need to be. But anyways, appreciate you guys hanging out with me on another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, if you're enjoying it, smash the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Really appreciate you guys seeking information. Don't let the Maple Pill be the end of your information gathering journey. Really do let it just be a springboard, a jumping off point to go down your own rabbit holes of research, because as citizens, we have a duty to society to stay informed, in my opinion. Now, you don't have to follow through on that duty, but you should. Because have you seen what politicians, the mainstream media are doing? If we don't hold them accountable, no one else will. So I appreciate you guys trying to stay informed and trying to hold those in power accountable, because someone needs to do it. All right. See you guys.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, table scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill.